Awesome. Let's get into this. I'm gonna take the 2 off my name because, well, did that already. Thank you all so much for coming back, joining back together. Hope you all enjoyed session 1. I know the one that I was in was fantastic, as I'm sure the rest were as well. So yeah, thank you to all our presenters. Thank you to the session 1 group. And I hope you enjoyed Nancy's meditation. It was fantastic. She's great. Okay, awesome. It's time for the panel. Different, I guess, change of mood, change of mindset. We're going from the relaxing meditation to no, I'm kidding. We're gonna still be chill, but the panel. All right, awesome. I saw Mark and Taylor were getting into their fighting mode, so let's go. No, we're good. Okay, before we begin the panel, I just want everyone to take note that you see on your screen all of our panelists. I don't know if there's any way to do this beyond just me telling you who's on the panel, and you'll see like as it switches between modes. But I will introduce them and just make sure that you see them on their screen, on your screen. Sorry about that. Also, for the time being, everyone could just keep themselves on mute. And after I introduce the panelists, I'll just give a few bit of last minute instructions as per how it relates to the panel. Okay, awesome. So first off, our first panelist is Mark Fine. Mark, you could just maybe wave, I guess, with the motion puts you on screen. Okay, cool. Okay, so from Prada to Princeton, Mark has spoken at some of the top companies and organizations around the world. He's a renowned coach, educator, and mental health activist who speaks internationally about his own experiences living with mental illness and teaches how we can create inclusive and empowering communities. Mark also facilitates leadership workshops for educators and founded a camp for teens. Thank you, Mark, for joining us. Our next panelist, you've already met her, Taylor Page Winfield of RUACH. Taylor is the founder and board president of RUACH Emotional Spiritual Support, a network of Jewish supporters offering free short-term support during the COVID-19 pandemic and its aftermath. Let me get there. She is a spiritual care chaplaincy intern with experience in corrections, military, and healthcare settings, and is trained in spiritually integrated psychotherapy. She is also finishing up her doctorate in sociology at Princeton University. Taylor, you want to give a little wave? So I guess the motion puts you on screen. I don't know if that's the thing that Zoom does. Just letting you all know I'm making this up. Sorry. Jory, you around? I don't see you. There you are. Hi, Jory. So Jory Hanselman is the executive director at Bamidbar Wilderness Therapy. Jory has worked in the field of wilderness therapy since 2012 and has experienced wilderness programs from the client and staff perspective, from field and office formats in Jewish and secular settings, and in the private industry and the nonprofit sector, and the nonprofit sector. Jory received her undergraduate degree from Tufts University and her master's in public administration with a concentration in nonprofit management from the University of Colorado. She's also a Wexner Field Fellow. Jory, if you want to give a little wave, so I guess you appear on screen. Awesome. Next, panelist number 4, Rabbi Patricia Carla Newman. Rabbi Patricia Carla Newman is the Senior Associate Dean for Religious Life at Stanford University. She came to Stanford University in 1996. She is the first university chaplain from a tradition other than Christianity in Stanford's history. In 2001, she was appointed Senior Associate Dean for Religious Life. She teaches and lectures widely on Jewish feminism, rabbinical ethics, the relationship between religion and education, and social justice. Rabbi Carla Newman was ordained at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in 1982. She has been a Hillel director and Jewish chaplain at UCLA and at the Claremont Colleges, a congregational rabbi in Alameda, California, sorry if I mispronounced that, and a regional director for the Union for Reform Judaism, the congregational arm of the Reform movement. At Stanford, she teaches courses including spirituality and nonviolent social transformation and rereading Judaism in light of feminism. She is married to biologist George Carla Newman and is the mother of 2 children. Rabbi Carla Newman, if you want to give a little wave, so I guess, I don't know if she's doing anything, but we'll just keep doing it. Okay, and our 5th and final panelist, Rabbi Dr. Bradley Herkman. Rabbi Herkman is a licensed clinical child psychologist and nationally certified school psychologist. At his core, he is an educator with a passion for building innovative, supportive, and inspiring learning environments. He primarily works with children, adolescents, families, and schools through comprehensive assessment of strengths and weaknesses, development of treatment plans, and provision of support services, therapy, presentations, consultations. He received rabbinic ordination from Yeshivat Chovevei Torah Rabbinical School. It's a lot of words. And his MS in school psychology and his PsyD in combined school clinical child psychology from the Furgal Graduate School of Psychology. of Yeshiva University. He has trained and worked in private schools, public schools, clinics, and camps, including NYU Child Studies Center, Camp HASC, and JBFCS. He lectures on a wide array of topics in psychology, special education, Judaism, and parenting. Okay, awesome. I apologize if I messed up any panelist introduction. I think I got it down. Okay, cool. If you haven't gotten the gist yet, I will be moderating this panel. Sorry, I am blessed to be moderating this panel with such incredible panelists. I don't know how I was never. Anyways, just to explain how this will work, a little background, a little, I guess, administrative stuff. We're going to be splitting up the panel into 3 sections. Section 1 is going to be discussion points that we as the RUACH ChaZak joint organization have prepared for our panelists, and they have seen before, and such they have had time to think of responses. After that section, we are going to be asking them your questions. If you recall, in our session sign-up Google form, when you sign up for your sessions, there is a place at the bottom to ask questions to the panelists. We'll be asking them those questions after the discussion points. And assuming we have time at the end, we will open up for live Q&A. If you have a question, please message me, Jason Blatt, JASON BLATT, in the chat box. I will even write down in the chat box. This is me. Hi, everyone. So if you have any questions you'd like to ask them live, please message that person. That's me. And without further ado, let's begin the panel. Also, just to recall, thank you, Haley, for reminding, if you do need support throughout, based off of, post session 1 during the panel, thank you, Haley, for resending the RUACH Free Emotional Spiritual Support form link in the chat box. Okay, without further ado, let's start our panel. So before we begin, I'd like to ask each panelist to introduce themselves and their backgrounds, both professionally and, let's pick professionally for now, and we'll continue in the order that I have them all written down. So Mark.
Sure. Thank you, Jason. Professional background. I've spent the past 15 years working for NCSY, which is a Jewish youth organization, originally as the regional director, also as director of Jewish education, and founded a summer program, TJJ Ambassadors Poland, which is a week in Poland and 3 weeks in Israel. Specifically, for the past 10 years, I've been involved in mental health advocacy. It started in college and young adulthood when I suffered my own depressive episodes, started speaking out about it, got good feedback, and as a result, created workshops around sharing my own lived experience as a way of creating inclusive and empowering environments, which then led into teacher trainings, as well as professional development workshops. I also do facilitation and coaching.
Taylor?
Well, thank you, Jason. I think you already pretty much introduced me and did the trick. So I am Taylor, and I am very passionate about integrating emotional and spiritual well-being and taking a really holistic approach. And I come from it both as a sociologist, really looking at social dimensions, but also as a spiritual care practitioner / chaplain in training to integrate this spirituality in. I'm really looking forward to speaking alongside all these incredible folks.
Awesome. Thank you, Taylor. Jory.
Hi, everyone. Really happy to be here. I'm Jory Hansen. I'm the executive director of Bamidbar Wilderness Therapy, and my journey to working in this field is personal. When I was 15, I had a number of friends pass away in pretty quick succession, was really struggling with depression, and I went to a wilderness therapy program. Well, the program I went to wasn't Jewish in the least bit. My identity as a Jew was central to that experience. I was there over Passover, and the parallels between that journey and our kind of ancestral journey is too hard to ignore. That led me to work in the field of wilderness therapy. And in 2016, I co-founded Bamidbar Wilderness Therapy at Ramon the Rockies, which provides wilderness-based therapeutic programming for young adults and resilience-focused programming for teens and community education based around mental health. So thank you.
Thank you, Dory. Rabbi Carla Newman.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here. I think that one of the most important pieces of my background in the context of this conference is that Taylor was a student at Stanford, where I'm one of the university chaplains. And in addition to taking my academic classes, she also was very involved in an interfaith program that I run, the Fellowship for Religious Encounter. And for many, many years, it's been clear to me that working in a university context where you help people to be able to find and define their dreams has been a really central piece of how I understand my work in the world and my sense of purpose. The image that comes to mind is Jacob's ladder, that the Mlachim were watching on that ladder, Mlachim being both messengers and angels. And so I see myself as guarding the dreams of the students with whom I work. And it's a great pleasure to be looking at Taylor's smiling face and seeing the way in which her dream has come to fruition.
Thank you so much. And finally, Rabbi Herkman.
Hi, so I'm a school psychologist, a clinical psychologist, and also a rabbi. I work primarily, and I'm right now in a public high school. I really focus on special education and really supporting high school students in their journeys. I have done rabbinic internships at Baruch Hillel and NYU, where my alma mater, and it's just been amazing seeing the ability to sort of support people through their journey into getting the supports that they need and really developing into their own identity and their own personhood. And so for me, while during the day, I kind of have my psychological practice in a public school, and as I joke around for friends and family, and on the weekends I have my religious life and my religious leadership. It's really amazing to be here at a conference where we can really integrate the two. And I really love, for those of you who are at my session one or saw the slides, I really love the integration of psychology and Torah in ways that they really support each other and really help gain an even deeper understanding and sensitivity to both the psychological and spiritual components of our growth.
Thanks, Rabbi Herkman. Well, if you didn't get before how incredible this panel is, well, hopefully now you do. Okay, awesome. Well, now that Rabbi Herkman has established for us the duality of Judaism and mental health, well, that brings us to our first question. Discussion point number one. What does mental health mean to you, to each and every one of you? How do you work to bridge the emotional and spiritual components of your work? Yes, Rabbi Herkman, as you finish this off, hopefully you can start us off.
Sure. I think, and I can't, and I'm going to apologize because I really try to cite things from when I hear them, but I heard this beautiful distinction, and I can't remember if it was during our pre-conversations or if it was during a conference I went to this week. I have source confusion issues. But understanding that there's various components. There's mental health, there's mental wellness, and there's mental illness. And I think that distinguishing between those components is really, really important. I think that as we start to explore our own identities, particularly once we're past childhood and start to develop into that more and more independent life, it becomes more important to check in on our mental health. And we take care of our mental health the same way we take care of our physical health. Similarly, mental wellness is kind of enhancing on that mental health and really building from there. And then mental illness are the areas where people might be experiencing what we would call clinical impairment, but really might be who are suffering and who need additional support in order to get them back to that baseline and really help support individual needs where they're at. Recognizing all those various components and where we are on each of those scales is really important. Our spiritual lives are deeply tied to that functioning. But understanding those various components are really important, and understanding that if one is experiencing mental illness, that they know that supports are available. And if someone feels mentally healthy, there is still room for wellness. There is still room for improvement. There's room for growth. And that's kind of a never-ending journey throughout our lives. I've heard a great analogy that that kind of growth, both emotionally and spiritually and intellectually, is kind of a downward moving escalator. So if you stand still, you're moving down. So if you want to be growing in life, you want to be improving, you have to constantly be climbing up that escalator and constantly be working. As soon as you stop and take a back seat, you start to go down. And so that's kind of the way that I look at mental wellness, is really understanding that we constantly need to be working on ourselves. We need to be building our toolbox, and we need to be enhancing our own coping strategies, our own mechanisms, and our own self of well-being and self-concept, so that we can grow ourselves and we can also, ultimately be able to help others as well.
Awesome, thank you so much. I'm Rabbi Carla Newman. Again, to repeat the question, what does mental health mean to you? How do you work to bridge the emotional and spiritual components of your work?
So I'm not a therapist, and I think it's important that when people have significant issues around mental illness or ill health, that they see someone who's trained to address that. What I see my work as being is helping people to flourish. So I'm very interested in the concept of well-being and the way in which community can play a role in creating and shaping a sense of well-being. So for many years, I was involved in a campus climate study group, where part of what we were trying to do was to ascertain what created stress for our students, what mitigated stress, and how good is our social safety net. So in a sense, again, connecting with Taylor and sociology, I'm interested in the sociology of what kinds of communities we create that enable people to flourish. And some of that is helping people to find a sense of purpose. And some of it is recognizing when there are things outside of our control, as COVID is in the moment, that has a significant role in how we experience the absence of well-being, and making the distinction between what we can't control and what we actually can.
Thank you so much. Jory, same question.
So at Bamidbar, we oftentimes talk about whole health wellness. And this is actually what my coworker and I are going to lead our session on later today. But looking at this idea of a multidimensional understanding of mental health and wellness. How do we understand how physical health and spiritual health and social health and mental health all connect to each other, and by building up one area, we help support and build up other areas. At Bamidbar, we do a lot of work focused on exploring meaning, values, and purpose through a Jewish lens, and asking each individual, like, how does Judaism, how does spirituality support your mental health in various areas? How do we connect to, for instance, Kabbalat Shabbat through the lens of community and through the lens of spirituality and through the lens of like building a physical space of calm, all of these different aspects. So really understanding mental health through a more holistic perspective that looks at all aspects of our lives and how we can build up support in various areas to then strengthen our wellness on a broad scale.
Awesome, thank you, Jory. Taylor, same question.
Well, thank you. So to answer this question, I want to share a little bit more about my personal background. So when I was an undergraduate, I'd really been working my whole life to get, I went to Stanford University, and I was like obsessed with it from, I think, when I was the age like 3. Like if you asked me as a 3-year-old what I wanted to do when I grew up, I said, oh, I want to go to Stanford. And so I really worked and was on this academic rat race my whole middle school, high school, everything, to get into the school that I had sort of put on a pedestal. And then when I did get in, I was still in this academic rat race sort of mindset. And so I was continuing to do the same patterns that I had been doing my whole life. And I got to this point where I was like, is this the way I want to live the rest of my life? Do I want to keep living only for the next test? Do I only want to keep living for the next, like focusing on the next exam? Like there has to be more to life. So I personally decided that I either needed to take a break from school and take some time off, or I needed to start focusing on the other parts of my life. So when I did that, at that time, I decided to really start exploring, and of course with the help of a therapist and a lot of other people, start exploring well-being and mental health, which included exploring spirituality. So I started meditating, I started doing yoga, and I actually got really interested on what led to spirituality and well-being, and really into positive psychology. So through this research, and I've continued to sort of use myself as an example and sort of look into it through academia as well now as working as a chaplain intern, is what are the things that lead to well-being, and what is the influence of spirituality in those? And similarly to what some of the other panelists have talked about, for me personally, the moment of growth and the moment of connection came with these moments of community, together in ritual, together in studying, together in singing. And so for me, mental health isn't just emotional. It's bringing in the spiritual community, the connection to something bigger than myself, that really makes the difference. So that's what I'm extremely passionate about. So whenever we write mental health, I always put in parentheses emotional and spiritual, because I really think that you can't have one without the other.
Thanks, Taylor. Mark?
Yep, I'm guessing the same question. And for me, a Jewish source that has always informed my work is Toho Koboro, the idea that our insides are supposed to match our outsides. And it always raised for me, are we living in alignment? Are we living in alignment with our own values? Are we living in alignment with the community and the world around us? And specifically, if you're growing up in a Jewish community, regardless of denominational affiliation, Judaism is going to be a part of your identity, even if it's a part of your identity that you reject. And how do we align ourselves with our own values? How do we align ourselves with our Jewish identity, however you choose to define that? And for me, I really decided to get into this work, or the first time I felt connected to this space was when I was in high school at the Avelis at the morning for my grandmother. And the idea of being Menachem Avel, of comforting the mourner, when I was sitting in that room and feeling that sense of connection to the community, I distinctly remember saying, this is something I want to be a part of, both the comforting process, but also this is a community I want to be a part of. And I think there's a piece of my work that is always drawn on that alignment in times of need between meeting emotional and spiritual needs through ritual expression, as well as creating a community and a space where everyone feels as if they are being taken care of by the broader community.
Thank you so much, Mark. Move on to the next discussion point. All of the answers have been incredible, but just due to respecting just the fact that we do have a lot to get through, I am going to mark off all responses to 90 seconds. And if someone is going over time, I apologize. I will give 30-second warnings, just because we have a lot to get through. I want to allow for more facilitation of a discussion, so I'm going to do a little bit more of a out of order response to this question. But this is the question itself is longer text, so I'll read it and then let's get into the conversation. So if each one of you could please discuss how mental health issues permeate differently and uniquely for Jewish individuals, obviously on a non-denominational level. And if you have any experience working specifically with Jewish college students, what makes it unique and why is it important for this specific demographic to speak about it and discuss topics in this area? So Carla Newman, would you mind if we started with you?
Much of what I would answer this with is part of what Rachel just did in the emerging adulthood session. Expectations around success, difficulty knowing who I am if I'm not being graded or if I'm not having external measures, which I think has happened for many people around COVID, returning home without being infantilized, anxiety around anti-Semitism, trying to figure out how to be engaged in the world when people are experiencing isolation. And in working specifically with Jewish college students, I think we've got a shared language and a sense of touchstone, what's kept us going as a people. One of the most important things, I think, is humor. And so that's something that I try to maintain in my interactions with students. But then all of our rituals and traditions, Shabbat giving us a pause and having a different sense of both time and how we value who we are and what we do, the relationships that get inculcated and reinforced in Shabbat, a commitment to Tikkun Olam, a sense, I've talked a lot about community, Al Tifros Min HaTzibor, being very attentive to the importance of community. And then for me, one of the most powerful texts that informs the way I work with students is Ohevet Habriot Mikirvan LaTorah, love human beings and bring them close to Torah. So the opportunity to both be connected to people, to care about them, and to be engaged in learning and study together.
Colin, it's interesting. One of the things that that I want to jump on in that question is the other side of it. And I appreciate your ability to address the college piece of it. But for me, this is a question I get a lot. And I would say the tagline that I always say is that mental health and mental illness does not discriminate. That one of the most dangerous things that we can do as people, especially as a Jewish community, but as people in general, is to think that that we are an exception to that rule, right? Whether it comes to anxiety, whether it comes to depression, whether it comes to abuse, whether it comes to suicidal ideation, whatever it may be, we are not immune. I think you captured it beautifully, that as a Jewish community, we have a shared language around certain aspects of this. And I think that's a huge piece in working with the Jewish community around mental health. I always stress that we're not immune, that it doesn't discriminate, and all sorts of mental health challenges can emerge across the board. And it's really important to be aware of that and to not feel isolated.
I'm going to pop on just specifically for the Jewish piece of it, which I think comes up in two perhaps unique ways for our community. One is the theological piece that sometimes comes along with mental illness of, did I do something to deserve this? And the questions of, is God giving me a test that only I can handle? And all those sorts of blame and guilt questions, as well as how does this impact my relationship with God? That this is now happening to me. Is this from him? What does that mean on the one hand? And on the other hand, going back to that challenge of alignment, specific challenges as it relates to ritual observance. Again, depending on your denominational background of when I was home, I did X, Y, or Z because I was home and this is what I did. Now that I'm in college, there are all sorts of things that I want to do. Is that in alignment with my beliefs? Is it not? Do I want to experiment? What does it mean that I'm experimenting in these ways? Whether it's Shabbat observance, whether it's sex, whether it's sexuality. I'm now being confronted with different parts of my identity. I believed X growing up, but now I'm being presented with Y ideas. I want to integrate them, but what does that look like? And I think those specific tensions come up in a particular way within the Jewish community as it relates to the guilt of not observing, and that experimentation as emerging young adulthood plays out a little bit differently within this community.
I want to jump off quickly of what Mark said, the idea of, is my suffering a test? Is this for me? Do I need to hold on to it? And I'm going to talk about this a little bit later today, but one of my favorite passages from the Talmud in Brachot, page 5, second page of the second side of the 5th page, there's a part that says, is your suffering dear to you? And the rabbi says, no, I take neither this nor its reward. So I just wanted to jump off Mark. There can be this idea that the suffering is mine and I have to fight it alone. And there's a beautiful idea that, like, actually, no, you don't have to go on it alone. And it doesn't have, you don't have to accept it and stay in it forever. So I just wanted to sort of jump off that. I think perhaps we can have a longer conversation on that later. And particularly for college students and rituals, I think what Judaism offers in the high-paced environment of college students and sort of the nonstop going and the grades and all of that is the idea of rest and sacred holiness of time. And even if whatever Shabbat looks like for you, having that time with community or friends or time away to relax, I think offers a really holy and a really healthy way of sort of dealing with stress and taking some time for yourself.
I want to jump in and just talk really quickly about stigma around mental health in the Jewish community, and also how that relates to working with college students. So there's still a lot of stigma around mental health, and especially around substance use disorders. And I think it's important to kind of bring that in and name that explicitly. If you think about like how many 12-step programs there are in synagogues versus in churches, it's so drastically different. And I think we still have a lot of work as a Jewish community to destigmatize mental health challenges. College students in particular, I don't know if you know this, but 18 to 25-year-olds only 38% of young adults within that age group who struggle with mental health challenges receive treatment. That's one of the lowest treatment utilization rates amongst all age groups. So there's already stigma in our community. And then for college students, it can be even harder to get support when someone is struggling. And I think as I look at kind of working with college students and ideas around addressing mental health in this population in particular, raising awareness, normalizing the challenges we all have, and recognizing that it's okay to not be okay. This is a really exciting time in life. There are so many possibilities, but there's also so much uncertainty. And so that's something that I think like really leaning into the fact that the possibilities exist, and it's okay if those can be overwhelming too, and that you might need more support.
Thank you all so much. So I think we're going to just to make sure that we get to as many of your questions as possible. We do have more discussion points, so I'm going to transition to the questions that you all sent us. Again, to the panelists, I'm going to ask the same thing, the 90-second rule. We do have time left, but I just want to be respectful and make sure we get to all the questions. Just to add for those that are present, if you would like to ask a question currently during the panel and you didn't ask it previously, feel free to message it to me. Hopefully I'll see it in my currently ridiculous and crazy chat box, but we'll get there. Okay, so let's get to some of the questions that you all asked before the event. So we can start with you, Rabbi Herkman. What textual sources do you know of that exist that discuss Judaism and mental health, and why are they beneficial?
A lot. I first got really inspired on the fusion between psychology and Torah, reading the works of Rabbi Dr. Abraham J. Tversky. He has like 50 books that are all various permutations of the same core idea, which is understanding self-worth and having strong self-esteem. He's truly an inspiration for me in terms of my professional journey. Mental health is all throughout our literature. There are amazing, amazing resources on looking at various biblical characters and their relationship with mental health and their experiences, and using those experiences for understanding mental health. I think some of our sessions this afternoon might be talking about that, all of them. But it's a wealth. I think that it's less about what texts are there and more about what kind of meaning are we looking for as we're learning these texts. And whenever you experience any Jewish text or any religious text or anything, you can always look for meaning in that. And there's tons of stuff from behavioral interventions. I taught a course on this when I was doing my post-smicha class at Chovevei, and there's tons of stuff around cognitive behavior therapy, interpretation, all sorts of things. There's a lot. Way more I can say right here.
You could argue that all of Chassidut is psychological. One thing that I just want to point out, because it happened during COVID and it was so powerful for me, is some of you may know Sarah Hurwitz's book, Here All Along. And she had asked me to edit one of the chapters, and it happened to be the chapter on holidays. And it was during the experience of the Brett Kavanaugh hearings. And a lot of what was being addressed for Christine Blasey Ford was that the way that she told her story seemed to be very disjointed. And one of the things that Sarah points out is that the Haggadah is actually a text of trauma, where it's very disjointed. It doesn't tell a story from, an arc from beginning to end. And that's what happens when we experience trauma. And this year, having read that already, but also having experienced Pesach during COVID, it seemed like the most relevant way. We all know the story, right? The text itself is not new. But what was incredibly moving and visceral was recognizing the trauma of the uncertainty of our lives.
I'm not going to mention particular sources because there's amazing, but I do want to just again give a little shout out for RUACH. That part of the work that we do is actually studying Jewish texts with folks on their own terms and in terms of well-being and mental health. So a little bit later at the end of the day, I'm going to be going through Brachot 5bet, the one I just mentioned. And that's personally one of my favorite examples of looking at mental health and well-being through Judaism.
And I'll jump in there and add, like, we have 3,000 years of tradition that explores the question, what does it mean to live well? How do we show up in community? How do we show up individually? How do we manage grief and loss individually and communally? How do we navigate challenges, family dynamics, all of these different pieces that contribute to our mental health? And I really believe that, like, every piece of text in so many ways, like at Bamidbar, we do a weekly Torah portion looking at the Parsha through the lens of mental health. There's something in every single Parsha. It's just like our tradition is so steeped in this question, like, how do we live well? And there's so much we can gain by looking at that through like our living eyes today, and asking what that means for us.
Yeah, taking what Jory just said and building off of it, a lot of times the assumption of the question you asked, Jason, was, what does Judaism say about mental illness? And that's what they actually mean when they asked that question, was Judaism say about mental health? As opposed to, well, what does Judaism actually say about mental health? And that's where the Chassidut, Musar, so much of what Jory was just talking about. And I think one asked that question, even to make the distinction that Rabbi Dr. Bradley started with of mental health, mental wellness, mental illness, and that the frame of this conversation is about mental health and mental wellness and how do we live our lives always, I think would really elevate the conversation in many ways and also make it that much more accessible to people to have this conversation. And what does Judaism have to say and contribute to it?
Awesome. Thank you all. I don't think I'm allowed to have bias, but I do have to say this is my favorite question. I don't know if I'm allowed to say it. But what is the role of prayer in mental health? I'll open that up to whomever wants to jump in first. Well, Rabbi Carla Newman.
Okay. Prayer is in part about gratitude and in part about perspective. So I think that what we do when we pray is take ourselves outside of the limits of the way we experience our own lives. And it also can be guidance for us. A sort of extraordinary story that a colleague of mine, Larry Marshall, tells. He was quite well versed in Jewish sources and Jewish texts, and he had been asked to take a pro bono case for someone who was on death row. And he had many things going on in his life, and he said that he couldn't do it. And it happened to be just about the time of the High Holy Days. And as he heard himself chanting Unatana Tokef, who shall live and who shall die, he realized that what was being asked of him was to make that not just words coming out of his mouth, but actions coming out of his being. And he did take the case, and he then became one of the most preeminent advocates for the abolishment of the death penalty. So I think that prayer gives us a kind of a set of other ways of looking at the world that, if we pay attention, can call us very deeply.
Okay, I'll come at this from the perspective of someone who often struggles with prayer and doesn't always particularly enjoy it. For me, prayer is a conversation. That can be a conversation with God, higher being, universe. It could also be a conversation with oneself. And I think the challenge we sometimes have, especially within the Orthodox community, is prayer as recitation, as opposed to prayer as conversation. And I think what opened up a lot of possibilities for me in prayer, especially as relates to mental health and self-expression, was that shift. That the text is a guide, as Rabbi Patricia was talking about, toward intentions to focus on, rather here's the script to read. So once I made that shift, for example, to God, I know we haven't spoken in a while, but I want to share that. And whatever comes out, comes out. Or reading Rav Dov Zinger's book on prayer and his idea of going through blessed am I for, blessed am I for, and seeing what comes out and emerges. And when prayer became a space for conversation, and that could be angry conversation, that could be happy conversation, that could be grateful conversation, it could be illuminating conversation. That allowed for self-expression and inner alignment in a way that the traditional text didn't always create the space for me.
If I can just add one more thing, given the context, I think that Misha Berachs often are an incredibly important part of prayer because it helps us to remember the people who we are connected to and to ask for assistance beyond our own capabilities.
I was also just, oh, Jory, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say that I love everything that has been said so far. I think prayer is so individual. Like, that is one of the pieces that it might mean something completely different for me than it means for you, and that's okay. And it touches on so many different things between like emotional awareness, connection with God, connection with community, connection with self, opportunities for awe, opportunities for gratitude, opportunities to step back and take perspective. There's the physical aspect of like wrapping tefillin and putting on a tallis. There's like all different like components to prayer, music, everything that like what it means to me might be different than what it means to you. And within that, when thinking about prayer, what I always ask is like, how do you find individually how this speaks to you? And also being okay that that might change over time, that like what grounds me in prayer right now might look different than what did 6 months ago. And it's a ongoing like process that we get to really grow from and return to and like see how we change as our relationship to prayer changes.
With Jory coming from Bamidbar Wilderness Therapy, just the idea of prayer in nature. And for me, one of the holiest things is like a practice of hitbodedut, where you basically speak to God with your own words from your heart. If it's in nature, even better. And I think what's so neat about that is like just the flow of connection for me. Like I can, hey God, what's up? It's Taylor. I'm driving to work. And also the idea of just expression of emotion. So when you need to scream, you scream. And when you cry, you can cry. And that like, often I feel personally, I can hold a lot of emotions inside. So the way is using prayer as a way to just express any emotions that need to come out, I think can be really wonderful.
And you know, Taylor and everyone, you know, not much to add other than when I was in grad school, one of the most important shifts that I went through was a shift from either or to a shift to both and. And that small change in mentality, thinking either or, that something has to be one way or another, versus both and understanding all the components that everyone just spoke about all exist simultaneously and are all valid and are all real and are all critical to our personal experience and our communal experience. Understanding all the aspects of that is the most important thing that I can add to what's already been said. Is just all of these are real, the individual and the communal, the ritualized and the personal. All of these pieces can exist all together.
Thank you all so much. We are running low on time with the panel. This is just, we all got swept away, just incredible as this is. I do want to allow for time for final words, but before then, there is one question that's been asked through many different lenses and different, I'm going to try and get the answer out and the question out in a way that encompasses everyone's variation of asking the question. If I can ask for shorter responses, just so we can allow for time at the end for final messages. Obviously, this event was marketed and catered towards Jewish college students. A lot of students, parents of college students, have sent in questions to the chat box here and to the Google form, concerned that there is not access to positive mental health support and programming for college students, and specifically Jewish college students on campus, due to a max capacity, due to perhaps not being enough available resources. The question is that, I guess, to create a union question of all of the questions that I've been asked is, how do you respond to there being a capacity, there not being enough resources, as well as allowing for a space of programming? what programming can be created, and how do we respond to the fact that sometimes there isn't enough available. So again, if I can ask for shorter questions or shorter responses, because we do not have that much time left. Again, the issue of not being enough resources and programming for mental health awareness and education and support on college campus for Jewish college students.
Great. I will make this like laser focused. A, they're right. B, hire me. C, even this goes something that Dr. Bradley spoke about in his session of internal locus of control versus external locus of control, and both and. It is possible that there isn't enough access, and there are still more things that we can do. So I would ask these parents, what conversations are you having before they go to college? What tools are you equipping them with? Are they aware of the resources that they can have access to? Do they know when I get to college, this is a spiritual advisor that I can call? Are they in touch with people from high school? And those questions can go on and on, far beyond the scope of this call. So my question would be, yes, access is an issue. And given that access is an issue, what can we still do to better prepare ourselves and improve and empower the spaces that we are in to tackle these issues more efficiently? Rutgers is a great example where there is now going to be a social worker based out of the Hillel. And that is but one example of many improvements campus communities can make.
Yeah, just to piggyback off what Mark said. I mean, almost every college has a student wellness center or some other name, right, where the resources might exist. You're right; it's not enough in the Jewish specific community, but that internal locus of control. So, hire Mark, or reach out to local mental health professionals. Reach out to your university chaplains. Reach out. There are a wealth of resources that are available, particularly for that age group. I think Jory's point earlier that the college age bracket is the least likely to access it is not necessarily a lack of supports that exist, but often there's so much stigma and so much challenges to actually get people into treatment and actually get mental health programming up and running. When you're talking to your Hillel rabbi, for parents or for students or whoever's running the show in the Hillel, are you asking for mental health programming? There are providers, there are grad students, there are plenty of people who are out there who are more than happy to come and share their experience, myself included among many others, who would love to share mental health topics and all sorts of creative ways to reach that. So it's a both and. Yes, there's a lot of work to be done, and you have to make sure that both as individuals and as parents, that if there is a need for support, you know what the resources are, you know how to access them, and you're able to make that step of building those supports in all their networks.
Many colleges and universities have people in all those roles, but they don't necessarily know one another or collaborate with one another. So building relationships between the mental health providers on campus and the spiritual providers on campus is really important.
I agree with everything that has been said and don't want to repeat it. So I want to look at it from a little bit of a different lens. I think oftentimes we think about like crisis response and providing services when something isn't going well. And I ask the question, how do we help things go right? And how do we look at preventative measures? And how do we look at risk mitigation from an early age and not look only at college, but also at like what supports are we providing to our youth and to our teens to help them like build resilience and understand how to ask for help and feel comfortable asking for help and seeking out resources when they need them. And so just want to plug that like preventative lens as well as response to mental health challenges, and also say that Bamidbar Wilderness Therapy serves young adults with residential therapeutic care. So if anyone is interested in learning more, please reach out.
Okay, awesome. I guess as the token undergraduate college student on, in this group right now, that advice was gold. And all of you listening right now should know that was incredible stuff. And all 5 of our speakers, all 5 of our panelists, and all of our presenters have so much to offer you. And I really urge you all to take the opportunity to ask them the questions, hear what they have to say and the like. If we weren't able to get out to get to one of your questions that you submitted beforehand or live in the Q&A, we apologize. If you would like to ask it in the future, feel free to message RUACH or ChaZak, myself or Taylor, and we can see what we can do to get your best answer. But before we conclude this panel, I'd love to give the opportunity to our panelists for final closing remarks. 60 seconds. What would you like to leave the community with before we move on to our break and then our final session? We'll go in our original order. So Mark, that would be starting with you.
To build off of something Jory and everybody else has said, this is a lifetime. And too often we focus on the crisis rather than how did we get there? And I think a lot of our focus should be on how do we build healthy mental habits integrated into our lives. I cede the remaining 30 seconds of my time to China.
I will also cede a lot of my time to the break, but I just wanted to say I think these are the start of the conversations. I think we're moving towards a place of away from stigma towards advocacy and towards education. And I think we're looking at a new horizon, and hopefully even the folks on this panel and even the folks here today, we can be working together to create a lot of options. And as always, RUACH support is here for you and anyone you need in the meantime, you know, who needs help in the meantime.
Jory?
I think the number one thing that I want to say is you're not alone. Like, life is hard. Life is especially hard right now. And I want to recognize and acknowledge that, and encourage everyone to seek community and seek supports and know that it's okay to not be okay. You're not alone in that. And there is a brighter future. So that's just what I would say.
I think given that we're in a time of COVID and Judaism has 3-letter roots for everything, the 3-letter root for COVID is kavod. And so I hope that what we can do is pay attention to kvod habriot, to honoring the human beings that are part of our lives and honoring ourselves. And by doing so, I think we will attain a significant dimension of wellness.
And I'll just add, I spent some time during COVID volunteering at a suicide prevention hotline. And one thing that I can tell you is that exactly what Joy said, you're not alone. People have called with all sorts of things. The supports are out there. There are people that care in your life. And as someone who's here, you are someone who cares. Just recognize that as long as we're here for ourselves and we're here for each other, we can emerge through this stronger than we could have imagined and stronger than we would have expected. So feel free to reach out to myself or any of us, but we are here for you, and know that RUACH is here for you, ChaZak is here for you. These are great opportunities to be able to get support in all sorts of ways, whether in illness or in health or in wellness.
Thank you all so much. If you